good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone's having a good day today. I welcome you all to today's webinar, which is about unraveling complex security incidents using a very powerful security technique called event correlation. So, my name is Niyati. I am an IT security expert with ManageEngine's IT security solutions, and I'll be taking you through the following topics today. So, very quickly, if anyone is experiencing any audio or video difficulty, please let us know using the live chat option and we'll look into it from our end. Also, another quick note, the recording for this webinar will be sent across within a couple of days, so you can always refer back to the material of today's webinar as and when needed. So, let's get started then. So, a lot of you may have heard the phrases event correlation or log correlation. There are several names for it, but you may have heard of it very often, but you may not be entirely sure what it means. So, that's why we'll be starting today's webinar by talking about what event correlation is and why we need it. Next, we'll cover the mechanics of event correlation, so how it works. We'll be covering what a security incident is, how event correlation uses what are known as correlation rules to detect these security incidents, and how you can tailor event correlation to suit your business needs. So, event correlation is so powerful and so flexible, you can tailor it to detect highly specific or highly general security incidents as per your need. So once we finish discussing this, we can start talking about how you can actually start incorporating it as a part of your security strategy. So how you can start using it to start detecting various security incidents and start strengthening your network security. And finally, I'll show you how all of this looks in practice by showing you our product Log360 and how the various event correlation reports and alerts actually look in practice. Okay, to understand what event correlation is, I'd like to highlight some important points first. Every day, a lot of activity happens on your network. And when I say a lot, I mean, for a typical network with say 100 devices, you would have hundreds of thousands of events happening throughout the day. So, when you say, let's say you want to modify a file, all right, you would need to first log into the workstation where it's located, access the file, and then modify it. So to you, it's one main task of modifying the file, but the thing is, on your network, it's recorded as these three smaller events in your network logs. So every single logon that happens on your network, or every single file access, database operation, program execution, each of these is a single event on your network. And that's why even 100 users and devices would result in hundreds of thousands of events worth of activity. So obviously, even attacks aren't just singular events. Individual events don't always paint the whole picture. So, whereas to you, it may just seem like a confidential file was downloaded or an important user's account was compromised, but in reality, an attacker had to take several steps to achieve their final aim. And all of these are recorded as individual separate events on your network. So that's why I say threats are complex incidents. They are made up of multiple events. And this is exactly where event correlation comes in. It is a really powerful technique which can process millions of logs from various sources on your network and can alert you to a potential threat. So, like I said, there are several steps that make up an attack. So, think about the possibility of identifying an oncoming attack just by looking at the first few initial steps, which allows you to immediately jump into action and ensure that an attack isn't completed. So, this gives you a lot of power over your network security and allows you to stay a step ahead of your attackers at all times. So let's look at this in some more detail. I told you that an attacker needs to take several steps to achieve their final aim, right? Let me just explain this with a couple of examples. I'm sure most of you would have heard of the WannaCry ransomware attacks, which occurred across the world last year. It literally took the world by storm. It was one of the biggest ransomware attacks ever seen. Thousands were affected across the globe, and the WannaCry malware was able to spread to so many devices because it was a self propagating malware. So it made use of this Windows vulnerability called Eternal Blue, and it used this to spread across multiple devices and affect all of them. So another example I'd like to talk about. This is another incident which happened later in the year at Deloitte, where the confidential email addresses from six of their top clients was stolen from their cloud storage. So this is a comparatively smaller scale attack. Of course, it's still a bad enough attack, but it is smaller in scale than, say, a WannaCry attack. But so you may be wondering why I'm talking about it. Well, the reason I've chosen to include this example is because of the way in which it happened. The attackers were able to gain access to Deloitte's network by hacking into an administrator account, which just needed a password. Like it just needed password to be hacked into. So several cybersecurity experts were of the opinion that this attack basically happened because even an important administrator account did not have two-factor authentication set up. So the point I'd like to make here is if a company which is considered, which is among the big four consulting companies of the world can have security loopholes like this, it just follows that any company is liable to have them as well. So no matter how careful you are, it is quite natural and likely that there are always going to be security loopholes somewhere in your network. Anyway, now we'll discuss the various components or stages of a security incident. So, coming back to my point from a few minutes ago, an attacker needs to take several steps to achieve their final aim. So, these steps can be classified under three basic stages. So, I'd call them entry, which is how they're able to gain access to your network in the first place. And then there's exploration. So, in this stage, this stage refers to how an attacker could move about your network either to reach their targeted device, or let's say if they don't have a target in mind. Exploration could also mean the process that an attacker takes to look for some data to steal. So all of this happens in the second stage. Finally, the actual breach occurs. So the actual download of confidential data or the use of your network resources for some other malicious purpose. So in the case of the WannaCry example which I spoke about, there would first be the malware being delivered to a specific network, which is the entry stage. Next, it made use of a vulnerability in Microsoft Windows called Eternal Blue, so it propagated itself onto various devices in the network. And finally, the actual ransomware attack, where it encrypted the data on several computers and delivered the ransom note. So these are the three stages for the WannaCry attack. And in the case of the Deloitte breach, as I already told you, an administrator account was first hacked. And now that the attacker had access to the entire network with these admin privileges, they were able to look around for specific data which they wanted to steal. And finally, they stole the confidential email addresses of top clients of Deloitte. So these would be the three stages in this case. So, the reason why all of this is important is because it has a lot to do with how event correlation works. The thing is, when you start breaking down various attacks into these smaller steps that I've just described, you'll see that they start following very similar patterns during the various stages. So, for instance, I told you how the WannaCry malware spread across the network, right, by exploiting a vulnerability. But any malware could use this method. So, let's say a password stealing malware may operate in the same way. So, to you, at the end stage, it may seem like two different attacks because ransomware and password stealing attacks are two very different things, right? But in reality, both of them involve malware and both would move through your network in the same way. So, again, now let's go back to the Deloitte example. I told you it started with an admin account hack. So, in this case, the admin account was used to steal some confidential data, but in reality, once the attacker gains admin privileges, they can do multiple things once they have admin privileges, right? They could either steal confidential data or install some malware. Again, in this case, in both cases, the method of entry to the network is the same. In both cases, an attacker would have to first breach an administrator's account. So maybe the method of entry to the network was a brute force hack of an administrator's account. So event correlation works with all of these patterns. It can identify when an unidentified service is spreading rapidly through your network and alert you. You can immediately investigate and put a stop to it. So, irrespective of what the malware does, this method is useful to stop several attacks. And the whole point is because it identifies anomalies at these initial stages, as already told you, you can very often prevent an attack altogether, or you can at least contain the damage. So, I've told you how event correlation works. I've told you that it identifies suspicious patterns of activity. But how does it know what activity is suspicious? So, this is very simple. All it does is it makes use of correlation rules. So, a correlation rule is nothing but a sequence of events which indicate a threat. For example, let's say there are three failed logons followed by a successful one. So this is the typical pattern which signifies a brute force attack. Or, like we already discussed in some of the previous slides, an unidentified service is installed and started up on several devices. So this could indicate a malware spreading through your network. So there are several ways that you can frame these correlation rules. Now, now I'll start going a little more in depth into how a correlation rule is structured. There are a lot of parameters involved. So, as I already told you, at its heart, it's just a sequence of events or actions. But there are some more parameters that it can take. So, let's say a specific action happens repeatedly. So, in that case, there may be a threshold limit for that action. So, again, let's come back to the very simple brute force example. Let's say a brute force attack might happen. I mean, you may say that three failed logons, or at least three failed logons followed by a successful logon signifies a brute force attack. So this means that a minimum of three failed logons have to happen for the brute force pattern to be satisfied. Okay, so that's where this threshold value comes in. Then the entire rule needs to be time bound. So this is where I'll talk to you about the time parameter. So each action needs to follow the previous one within a certain time limit for that rule to be meaningful. So, again, I gave you an example where you can identify a malware spreading through your network if it is noted that a single unidentified service is getting downloaded and started up on several computers on your network, right? But let's say that this service is installed over a course of 5 to 6 days. In this case, it may not really be a big deal. It's Only if it happens, say within half an hour, that you need to start worrying. So that's why time is a very important parameter, and the entire rule needs to specify the time limits between each action in a rule. Finally, there are also certain conditions or filters which a rule can also account for, which I'll speak to you about next. So, the thing is, event correlation alerts are the most meaningful and accurate if they account for business context. So, that's why correlation rules can be made to account for this as well. Okay, so let's again take a couple of examples. So, you have a critical file server, so you want to monitor all accesses to it. But um, when there are confidential files on a critical server, it's obviously natural to assume that a lot of employees may be accessing those files on that server quite often. So you don't want to be alerted for all of this. But let's say you have a list of blacklisted users who you know are can be suspected of malicious intent. So you can set up correlation rules to alert you only if these specific users are active on a critical file server. Okay, and of course it's not just limited to users. You can also set conditions on several other parameters like the devices involved or IP addresses and things like that. So you can, instead of monitoring all your database servers, you can set up certain rules, certain data breach rules, to monitor only specified database servers which are important to you. So this is why I say you can add business context to your event correlation process by checking for highly specific conditions which are important to you and your organization. All right. Having discussed all of this, let's come to looking at how you can actually include event correlation as a part of your security strategy. So, how do you start using it to detect all of the security incidents on your network in a quick and efficient manner? I've listed a four-step process that you see over here. So, the first step is building attack scenarios. So you'd have to think of the kind of attack scenarios that you want to be watchful for. Okay, so at this stage, you need to sort of prioritize and pick out the various network assets which are the most critical to you. So it could be a specific database server, or let's say a specific set of endpoints which are very important to you, or let's say one or two firewalls which are protecting certain very important other critical assets in your network. So you need to create a list of all of these assets. Now, once you've done this for each of these assets, you need to think of the various ways it can be accessed and the specific events on those devices that you wish to monitor. So if you remember, I told you any security incident has three basic stages, right? So those would be entry, exploration, and breach. So you need to start thinking along these lines. You need to think, what are the various paths that an attacker can take to access your critical servers? So for example, can they be accessed remotely, or are they only available internally within the network? Or let's say, does an attacker need physical access to the device to breach it? So in this way, you need to start thinking of the various ways that an attacker could actually reach that specific server and access some resource on it. So all of this might be sounding a little complicated, but I will explain all of this with an example in just a minute. Anyway, so now let's come to the second stage. Once you've modeled all of these scenarios, it's pretty easy to set them up as correlation rules on a software like Log360. So I will be showing you this solution in just a moment. It's ManageEngine's SIEM solution, which also includes a really powerful event correlation engine. So in this stage, you need to translate all of those attack scenarios into correlation rules and set them up on the software. Beyond this, it becomes pretty simple. So, coming to the third stage, you'll start receiving alerts when all those rules that you have set up are matched. So, basically, the software does the work for you. It collects the logs from the various sources in your network and it compares them against those correlation rules that you have set up. And whenever a match is detected, it immediately alerts you. So once this happens, you need to jump to action. Here, you need to conduct an investigation into the incident. So, using your software's reporting tools, you can identify which device was breached or which users were involved. So you can immediately take any response measures as necessary. And of course, you can, once you get these alerts and investigate them, you can also get more information about how attackers are breaching your network. So that can help you identify certain security loopholes, which help you strengthen the security of your network. So let's say you have a rule monitoring your various network devices and you get an alert that a specific firewall was breached by an attacker. So this way you'll realize that security on the security settings on that firewall may not be as strong as you imagined. So you can immediately go over to that firewall and set up any required settings and thereby strengthening your network security. And finally, you will have to review the performance of your correlation rules itself. So let's say that a rule is generating too many false positive alerts, which is to say you're getting a lot of alerts, but then once you investigate them, you realize that they aren't actually a threat after all. So this might indicate a flaw in your rule design. So that might mean you need to make the rule more specific. You may need to add some more actions to it, change the rule structure, or modify the parameters that I told you about, like the threshold limits or the time limits between actions. So I told you I'd be giving you an example. So I'll just explain how you can think of various attack scenarios and build a correlation rule for it. So this would cover the first two stages of this process that I've shown you here. So let's take a simple case. Let's assume you have a very critical file server, which obviously contains some very important confidential files, and you want to ensure that there are no unauthorized accesses of those files on the file server. So now you need to start thinking of various ways in which an attacker might be able to breach that server. Okay, so let's assume that this cannot be accessed remotely. It is, you have set it up such that it is only accessible within your network. Okay, so let's say there's one case. Okay, so let's say that someone simply accesses the server, is able to compromise an account through brute force and directly accesses the file. Okay, so that would be the first correlation rule here. So several failed logons. So let's assume three or more failed logons, followed by a successful logon to the file server, followed by a file access. So this is the most simple case where someone simply breaches an account on the file server itself and is able to access a file. But there are other ways that this scenario can play out. So let's say someone is able to breach an administrator account. And what the attacker does then is that they go over to the file server and modify certain file permissions so that later on they are able to access files on that server using another account. Okay, so this is one step more indirect. So the person might breach an administrator account once again using a brute force method. They are able to guess the administrator's password and then they go over and modify the file permissions. Of course, you may not always look for brute force attempts. You can also look for a successful logon followed by modifying of file permissions followed by an admin logoff. So in this case, this might be suspicious if it happens in quick succession in a very short time frame. So assume that you see that you note that an administrator simply logs on, modifies a file permission, and logs off, let's say within 2 minutes. So this might seem like an anomaly because why would an administrator just log on, perform one single activity, and log off immediately? So this might indicate an attack. So I'm just giving you examples of how you can think, how you go about thinking of various scenarios in which your critical resources may be accessed. Okay, so you can set up correlation rules in several ways. Once you identify the various ways that your critical resources can be accessed, of course this is all, of course this is like a second stage. It might be too much of a pain to sit and think of hundreds of attack scenarios and modifying and building correlation rules for them. So this is why our solution also gives you a lot of predefined correlation rules where all you have to do is just enable the rules. So I'm going to go over to log 360 now and show you how event correlation looks in practice. Okay, so this is the event log analyzer component of log 360. So this is the complete log management module of our SIEM solution, and it also contains an extremely powerful event correlation engine. So I'm going to show you some of the predefined reports that we have so that you get an idea of how it is that you can conduct incident investigations using this software. Okay, so this can give you an idea of how event correlation looks in practice. So this is the main correlation dashboard, which you can see I've selected over here already. And as soon as you select this tab, this is the main dashboard which opens. So you can see you have a one glance view of the various security incidents identified on your network. And of course, you can select a time limit using this calendar widget over here. So as you can see now, once I log on to this dashboard, I can immediately make a note of the various incidents that have been identified. So I can also navigate to specific incident reports and look into how a specific incident occurred. Okay, so let's start with possible worm activity. Okay, so possible worm activity is an example that I've already spoken to you about. It happens when a specific service is noted to be installed or started on various devices of your network. So you can see that this rule was triggered a total of 2 times. So once again, you can see that various details are given. You can see what the specific service is called. You can see which user was involved, and you can see the time at which it was detected, of course. Now you need to go to a second level of investigation. You need to know the exact sequence of events which occurred. So all you have to do is click on event timeline, and you immediately note that this sequence of events happened. It happened at these various times, and you can see that a service was installed on several devices at the same time. And of course, if you want more details than this also, you just have to click on details and you drill down to the raw log contents, and you can identify which device was affected. So let's look at some more interesting reports. So you see here we have a category of rules called cryptocurrency. Okay, so this is a very interesting and pretty new trend that we've been seeing in the last few years. And the thing is, why you should be worried about cryptocurrency mining in your organization, because cryptocurrency mining is a highly resource intensive process, and you may see that many people may not have access to the resources that they need to mine cryptocurrency. So it's very often it occurs that employees tend to misuse their organization's resources to mine for cryptocurrencies. So we have a couple of interesting reports which monitor for the use of several popular cryptocurrency software and alerts you if they are noted to be started. So you can see that someone has started a cryptocurrency software, and you can immediately note which user account was involved, and you can see which cryptocurrency software is being used, and you can immediately put a stop to this as well. So this is not an attack, but it's not an attack where your data is breached or stolen. This is more to do with misuse of your organization's resources, right? So just like mining software, you can also see if a wallet software is started. This is another accompanying report. So let's look at some other reports. So now let's look at the suspicious service installed. So this is another rule, which is a slightly more complex rule that involves more action. So I told you that event correlation can put together a sequence of different events and alert you to a suspicious incident. So if you look here, you can see that a sequence of various steps were combined, and log 360 was able to identify that there were several failed logons to a specific device on your network, and that account suddenly was able to log in and install and start a service. So when this happens, you can know that someone was able to hack into an account on a device in your network and start a possibly malicious software. So when you note that this is happening, you can immediately go over to the specific device. You can analyze what the service does. So you can see if it's actually something malicious. You can identify it, if it is conducting any malicious activity on your network, and you can immediately delete it. So it's all very simple once you've set up the rule. You just have to sit back and relax, and the software will tell you when any of these suspicious events are happening on your network. Of course, if you want to go beyond the event timeline as well, you can also conduct a deeper forensic investigation wherein you conduct a search. So you would like to know the various events that this affected user or the affected device was involved in, and you immediately get a report of the various logs which name the specific affected device or user. So as you can see, there are several levels of investigation that you can conduct once you receive an alert. So if you go over to the manage rules page over here, you can see the list of various rules that we have, and you can always enable or disable them as needed. So we have about 30 predefined rules for you, which cover several categories, and you can pick and choose those rules which are meaningful to you. So correlation is a pretty memory intensive process. Okay, so you need to select your correlation rules pretty carefully and set them up such that they are the most important scenarios to your business. So you can look into the rule description, or you can even enter a specific rule builder page, and you can see how it's constructed. You can change the parameters over here, and you can set it up such that it is specific to your business context. So this is the rule builder page. So event correlation does, log 360 doesn't just give you these few predefined rules. It also allows you to create highly custom rules if that's what you'd like to do. So all you have to do is click on create correlation rules. You see a list of various possible events on your network using this left menu. So all you have to do is select uh, events from here, So as you can see, it's highly specific. You can select any of the actions or events from this left menu. You can create rules to suit your needs. So you can even set up filters. As I told you, you can say that the username equals a specific uh, values over here. Okay, so or you can even say, so sometimes you would like to ensure that the username remains, so if the this event occurs, let's say 5 times, so you can also set values like username is constant. So this filter states that for all five occurrences of this action, which is a database being dropped, you would like to ensure that the username remains the same throughout. So this helps you ensure that the same user is deleting more than 5 tables on your network, on your database server. So there are a lot of options like this. I can't exactly go into every single option that we have. I would in fact encourage you to download our product and look at the various options that there are. But anyway, coming back to event correlation in general, we have explored what event correlation is, how it works, and how you can incorporate it into your security strategy. So in conclusion, basically, I'd like to say that event correlation is an extremely powerful and flexible technique that you can use to detect various kinds of attacks. So, because it is able to identify, I mean, collect and process events from various sources on your network, you can really make use of it to identify various kinds of attacks or security incidents that are happening from any corner of your network. So I would just like to uh, send you a quick link which gives you some more information. And of course, if you are interested in a quick personal demo of EventLog Analyzer or Log 360, of course, our support team would be very happy to give you a personal demo of the software as well and show you how you can use event correlation to strengthen your network security. So I'll send you the link in just a minute over chat. Uh, but other than that, if you have any questions for me, you can ask away using the chat option, and or you can even email us at this ID I've mentioned over here. So thank you very much for attending today's session, and I'll see you the next time. So I've sent you the link over chat. If you have any questions for me, you can always ask using the same chat option.